see some of the facilities that we give money to and just meet with a few stakeholders. So thank you to Jennifer Cooper for putting this all together. This was her first offsite meeting as well, and it went flawlessly so far. Thank you to Ben Parks for hosting our work session yesterday. Rachel and Ian gave us a wonderful tour, and there was some good TV coverage last night through the local television station. Brooks, the reporter, did a nice job of following us around on our tour. Also, thank you to Janine Balek for our wonderful work session yesterday and information on how the grant process works. And with that, we will get started here. Officially, the meeting is called to order, and our first order of business is the approval of minutes. Are there any questions, or if anyone would like to make a motion to approve the minutes?
The motion we approve the minutes is written.
I'll second.
Okay, are there any questions or additions? Seeing as there are none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Colleen. Aye. And at this point in our agenda, we have a request for public comment. We do not have anyone here publicly that would like to make any comments. And we did not have anybody sign up to make comments on the team's program. So we will go ahead and move right on to our agenda items. Agenda item A is our director's report. So I'd like to start out the director's report by saying congratulations to Brian Paulson on his new position, just in case I miss it somewhere. Welcoming Director Warren. Take it away.
All right. Chair Early, members of the board, Larry Warren, Director of the Oregon State Marine Board. Got a few things to add to the director's report, and then of course take any questions. First, a little update on the registration manager. So it might not have been caught by everybody. Jeanette kind of retired in a hurry on us in January, and that seems to be the way the world's going these days. And so one of the folks behind the scenes that gets a lot of things done for our agency is Melinda Harrison. And Melinda's been with the agency. She might be our longest time employee now after some retirements. And she stepped up to fill in as a temporary manager while we recruited that registration manager. And she's just done a great job, and I really appreciate her help. She's taken a big workload off for me. And we will be doing in-person interviews April 12th for that position. And we have a good candidate pool. And I would expect us to be able to find a successful candidate for the registration manager. And then likewise, you mentioned Brian Paulson getting the boating safety manager. Cindy Bolduck, who many of you would know from our guide program, she did the temporary manager in the boating safety program after Randy retired. She did an excellent job and really appreciated, again, her helping out during that time. Allowed me to focus on the short session by having two great internal people step up and help the agency out. I wanted to point out in the board report, remember Withy had asked me about the possibility of doing kind of a staff board day, and now that COVID restrictions are gone, we can, or not gone, they're mostly gone for us. May 1st is when we'll open up to the public. We would be happy to do that. Typically mid-September is a good time when we start thinking about when people are busy, when people are gone on vacations, and when people are getting their kids ready for schools. And so what I would suggest is that we would pick a day the board could attend. The general plan would be an office tour, staff introductions, some sort of meal, lunch, and then if it worked out, which I think Janine and I talked about it, and it would, that we would hook on a tour to Buena Vista, which is a program, a boating facility that the board's put money into and grants, and it'll be mid-construction by that time. And so we will go forward with that plan and then just find out who of you would like to attend. And remember, Withy, it looks like you had a question or a comment on that.
Yeah, thank you, Larry. I would like to make a comment. You know, we have been together for a couple of years, as Chair Early pointed out. It's very nice to meet the people that filling our role. So the last couple of days have been great, and it really helps us be more effective as board members when we do that. I've been on the board now for almost 4 years, there's quite a few people I've never met, I don't know, yet I rely upon them in helping me fulfill my job here. So I would encourage us to move forward with getting folks together, meeting in a informal situation so that we understand each other and we appreciate what they're doing as we try to support the voting community in Oregon. So that's my 2 cents.
So with the board being all together and even if it is an informal event, it would still need to be publicly noticed and treated the same as what a work session or a board meeting would be. So
Surely, absolutely. We would notice it, assuming 3 or more showed up, we would notice that and make sure the public knew that all the board members were going to be together. And that's really the main function, is just to let people know you're together and what it is that you're doing with that time. So we'll go forward and plan that. And again, I'm sure Jennifer Cooper will reach out to all of you to see if there's days at work or if it's just something you won't be able to make work with your schedule, so we can get an idea for planning purposes of what to do there. On the short session, gave the board regular updates throughout the legislative session. So the main bill that passed that impacted our agency was related to the Newburgh Pool, Senate Bill 1589. I won't go through all those changes because I know I've sent those out to the board multiple times. So what I'd like to do is just let the board know that staff has been really busy working on this one. So what happens after the bill passes is the governor either actively signs the bill and it goes into law, or the governor does not actively sign the bill and it just becomes law, or the governor vetoes the bill. And the most likely case on this one is just that it's one of the many bills that she just doesn't sign. It just goes into law based on a calendar date after the legislator passes it. So to get ready for that, staff has updated the test to get the towed water sports because all the information changed. One of the things that Jessica Watson worked on that I really appreciate is she's made it more accessible for an online test, with the idea that it is possible, it's not something that we'll be able to staff all the time, but it is possible that we could have somebody go to a ramp on a busy day. They could take the hour or so to study the material, take the test, pay their fee. And then if they had all their information they needed to fill out their application for the boat certification, we'd be able to give them stickers that day. And the idea with that is just, we know there's going to be some families caught off guard by this that show up to tube or ski that just they haven't paid attention because this hasn't been relevant to them. And we're trying to just find ways to make it easy. And even if we're not at the ramp to kind of do that immediate service, people can go on, they can take the test. I passed it, I got to take a test run at it. And you get an email back that tells you whether you passed or failed. If you failed, it tells you go study the material, and then you can retake the test. And then you fill out the application, and our turnaround will be pretty good on those stickers. So that test was a big piece, and Marianne McKenzie also worked on updating that test. Jessica helped working on the process of the test. So the two of them did a great job getting ready for that. We've sent notices to all the current permit holders, telling them about the law change, how it applies to them, things that they will and won't be able to do in the future. And so we've gotten quite a bit of feedback, some positive, some not so positive about that, but we're implementing the law as it's written, so we would have expected that. And then I believe, boy, my days are running together. I think it was Monday or Tuesday, Josh Maham and Brian Paulson drove around and put out new signage. The new signage has been updated. It's a nice bright blue. It stands out. It's got QR codes that takes people to updated web information, and really trying to make sure it's easy for people to understand what the rules are. So that signage is out, and right, Brian? Yeah, making sure. And then we've been working on talking points for law enforcement and the park staff that are going to interact with people. And again, I just want to reiterate, there's folks that have been living and breathing this for the last decade. And then now that it impacts tubers and skiers, there'll be people that are newer to this process. And so we're just trying to make sure the information's out there as well as we can. And then Josh Mahone did get the rules process started, and there was a bit of confusion, not a lot, but so if you remember, the board had passed quite extensive rules in the Newburgh Pool, but now that the legislator came in with a bill that's more prescriptive, we're repealing most of those rules. And some folks said, wait a minute, why are you repealing these rules? And we thought this was all, and we're repealing them because the law is more prescriptive. And so all the controls and everything are there, but for folks that don't immerse themselves in state rulemaking, there was a few that thought, why is the agency repealing rules when the legislator just passed a bill to do more? And it's because the legislator passed a bill to do more, we'll follow the law. So eventually the board will need to take a vote on that. And again, really the only decision point for the board is how to define towed water sports. And I think the reality is there's not much leeway in that either. It's everything but wake surfing. So they've worked on some different language that helps describe that and has to do with which side of the wake you're on and ropes. And so, but for the most part, the board will be voting just to get in alignment with the law, which we have to do. So, so that piece will be coming. And then the final update I had, and then just any questions, is just, I know there's been a lot of information since the January board meeting about the PWC noise in the area of Meldrum Bar. And at the January board meeting, the board identified that was an issue based on the input that you all had received, asked staff to go work on that. We did a lot of work. Multiple people in the agency met with local governments of various forms and others, law enforcement, really trying to find a local solution to what felt largely like a local problem. And because as part of the January lead up, we had polled statewide to see if other areas were having some of these same problems, and we heard resoundingly they were not. But ultimately where we're at, since the board book has been produced, and I remind folks, the board book gets produced about 2-3 weeks before you see it, so the material sometimes is a little stale by the time we're sitting here today. It's evident that we as an agency are going to need to take some sort of action if the board still believes this is an issue that you would like us to resolve. So what I would propose today is a solution where the board ask me to go put in a temporary rule that for PWCs operating from the Willamette Falls to Waverly, they must not operate above 75 decibels. Temporary rules are generally used to solve a specific problem and should stay narrowly focused because they have not gone through a full public process. And staff have the ability to put in temporary rules. We can do that very quickly. In fact, we could have them, I think today's Thursday, so we could even have them filed by tomorrow. So that's something that we could do to give this area some relief for this summer. And then what I would propose, if that is the direction the board feels is acceptable, that staff come back in July and bring a discussion and framework for potential permanent rulemaking for the board. And staff then could be better prepared to bring information on how the temporary rule is working, history on why the current sound rules were adopted by the board about 7 years ago after their public process at that time, an overview of other states' voting rules, enforceability issues, and options to move forward. So that is where we're at. I don't need an official motion to do a temporary rule. That's an authority we can do, but this felt like one I did not want to do without the board giving me your opinion on the temporary rule.
Craig.
Yeah, I have some notes here that I want to go through. I'd like folks to imagine having an immune compromised health condition or stress, just makes it much worse. You also have a young family, you just bought a house on the Willamette. And then of course, COVID strikes. So you're restricted to your home, which is meant to be a safe haven, area of peace and quiet. You have a chainsaw like noise coming from the river for 5 to 6 hours every day, turning your home into a torture chamber. Local officials try to help you, but they can't because the noise comes from the river, which falls under the jurisdiction of this board. So ask yourself, what would you do, especially when you're at your wit's end? So that's a concern for me, and that's a real case that's on the river today. And I want to make the following points. We are not a public health agency. Our role should be to apply existing public health standards at location where public health is at risk. We don't have to do it for the entire state. We do though where people live on the river in heavy populated areas and their lives are affected by boat noise. The boat noise shoreline standard for protection of public health is well established at 75 dBA, rooted in the research done by health agencies such as EPA, CDC, and the World Health Organization. Surrounding states apply the 75 dBA standard, and we've all been giving the reference information for those. So we can go to those locations to verify for ourselves that indeed 75 dBA is applied to the other states. I believe that OSMB needs to get out of the way of local health officials in managing the public health of their residents by applying established standards that extend sound level standards from the land onto the water. And going to 75 dB would do that. Seattle has had a boat noise shoreline standard of 74 dBA, measured 50 feet offshore since 1980. Portland citizens deserve the same protection for the health and welfare of the public. The board puts the boating community in a bad light when allowing boat noise like this to cause such turmoil in a community. And additional boat restrictions will wind up being put on the community by local politicians. For these reasons, I would like to make a motion to initiate rulemaking now and start the public process to amend OAR 250-010-0120 as recommended by the community of Gladstone and Clackamas, where they state they would like to lower the shoreline decibel limit from 84 dBA to 75 dBA for the population of the centers that are on the water, which would include the Portland metro area. Further, I think we should add as they state, a narrative standard that allows context to be considered when determining if a noise disturbance warrants a citation regardless of the decibel output. That is a standard these communities have put in place for activities on land. So it's up to them to wind up enforcing it, and they'll have to do it through their local sheriff on the water, the same people that we use to administer our rules. Further, the third aspect of that is to add disruptive and dangerous activities such as flips, sittings, and rigging to the list of activities not permitted by personal watercraft operators. That indeed is the real source of the current problem. It's not when the personal watercraft are in the water, it's when they're doing flips, turns, so that their exhaust systems aren't muffled at all. So I would like to move that motion forward. I believe it's in the best interest of the board, the best interest of the voting community to move forward with this now and not postpone it. Those are my comments.
Okay, so we have a motion. Craig has made a motion. Do we have a second?
I second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. And so we have a discussion then. May like to start?
Sure. This was brought to us as a very specific situation regarding a specific type of boat in a specific geographic area, and almost to the point of specific individual boat operators. I think it's premature to be talking about a broader scale rulemaking that would affect not just PWCs, but all boats. I chatted with a resident, not of the Melbourne Bar area, but another person who lives on a very intersection of the river. And they said, other than, if she knows who that jet ski operator is, the one that we're talking about, she's like, yeah, that's the problem. Everybody else with a louder boat is passive. And so I think it's premature to be talking about this without getting the information that Director Warren talked about regarding, what the other state laws really are, some better discussion about noise, and really trying to solve this particular problem and not make it a statewide or even a region-wide issue if it's a current non-issue. The other thing that, in some of the comment letters that were received after the deadline, there was a mention of music noise as falling under this. And to a lot of folks, yes, music coming out of various boats is a problem. But our jurisdiction is engine noise. And so whatever we do in terms of narrative standards or decibel levels does not apply to amplified music. That still falls under the local jurisdiction guidelines.
Which- Yes, go ahead.
Question, so the motion was to, so it's not the temporary rule, this would be a permanent rule.
That's right. His motion was to open rulemaking.
Got it, okay.
So-
I would like to take mine, come back, and I'm more in favor of the temporary rule, and see where that leads to next year.
Okay, so you would like to rescind your second?
Correct,
Okay,
correct, and then I will be in favor of the temporary rule.
I see. Okay. Okay, Craig?
We need to understand that when we open rulemaking, it doesn't implement a rule. When we open rulemaking, we provide for public comments, and everything that Larry is suggesting can be accomplished with the rulemaking, within the rulemaking process. It is not a permanent rule. It's open to consideration for this board after we gather all the information. If we postpone it until July, that just delays the process, magnifies the problem. I think we need to deal with it now.
Well, technically, it doesn't delay anything, because even if we don't open formal rulemaking, we can go out and solicit public comment. We could have a committee formed, we can do whatever we needed to do to be able to gather that information, get the feedback that we need regarding this certain area, and not have to open formal rulemaking until that time.
Okay, but
And-
still, within the formal rulemaking process, we're collecting public comments. We're reviewing the issue. The staff is going to provide us more information to cover the areas that both Laura and Jorge talked about. So we can still do that within the process of rulemaking.
Director Warren?
So I think, it's always tough, right? Because do you open rulemaking, do you not, and what can be done with and without rulemaking open? I think one of the challenges, and again, we have a solution that we can implement tomorrow with the 75 decibels for this area that will give 180 days of rules to address the issue for essentially through October. If listening even here today is things around public health and flips and the repetitive nature of the noise, which is absolutely some of the difference between boats passing through. I would suggest that from my perspective, the first thing that we would have to do, whether the rules were open or not, would be to come back to the board to get better clarification on what the direction is, because if we can't go out to the public with just no framework, no kind of what are we doing, what options. And so what we found works well through some of our other rulemakings is when we have those discussions with the board provides some direction on narrowing so that when we go to the public, we have something a little more specific to gather that information on, bring that back. And it's very conceivable on this issue that we'd be prepared to have the board vote at the October meeting on a permanent rulemaking. So I wouldn't personally feel like staff would be ready to start holding public meetings without a better framework in place from what the board wants as a potential final solution.
Can I make one additional comment? Communities have come forward to the board requesting help. I am concerned that we're focused on one individual. I think we need to be listening to local communities. We have a letter here from the city of Gladstone asking for action. We also have the Clackamas County Commissioner sentiments. I think we need to pay attention to that and quit focusing on one individual that we're concerned about. This is a community issue, and we need to listen to the community and let them have some influence on managing the public health of their citizens. So that's my last comment.
So I think that, we all agreed at the last meeting that this was an issue, and we wanted to try to allow for the local communities to be able to deal with it themselves, but that wasn't possible through a multitude of reasons. So now we're addressing this again, and I really feel like a temporary rule at this point is going to provide that relief for those communities that they are seeking for this year. And then it will allow us some time to be able to put together a very good rulemaking that's not going to be overreaching and doesn't affect more people than what we are intending with this. And also take into account public health and all those other agencies that may want to become involved in that.
Can I comment again?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
When we say it's going to affect more people, the suggestion is to only apply the 75 dB shoreline standard in population centers such as Portland metro area. No one else is affected. If we waive the 84 dB for the remainder of the state, because there's no population centers on the river or on the water in the rest of the state, no one else is affected. So I'm a little concerned when people say, well, we're affecting other voters. The whole idea is not to affect other voters. Only have this apply where we have population centers on the water.
Jorge?
Yeah, if the issue that we have currently is resolved with the temporary rule, would we still be looking at making the 75 dBA a permanent rule making after the temporary rule?
Yes, because a temporary rule is only good for up to 180 days. So this rule, for instance, if it enacted tomorrow, tomorrow would be the 8th of April, then it would go until October 8th. That would be the 180 days.
Okay.
So, and then, yes.
Okay.
So then in order to extend that, it would need to be a permanent rulemaking, which is if we opened up rulemaking in July for a permanent rule with what Member Withey is suggesting, then it would go into effect probably at the October board meeting. And it's also possible that we could have a special meeting to address it prior to that October meeting. Yes.
So, I also agree that this is a problem. I notice it's an issue. I worked in aviation for about 27 years doing environmental reviews of airports and airports. And I get that this is an issue, but again, I'm concerned because if we go from 84 to 75, we may impact some other boats in the metro area who really don't have a choice. And the other one I'm concerned about is the whole point about floats and trips, because there are people that are doing those that don't necessarily exceed the 75. And so again, I think we need more information and more time to kind of figure out how do we solve this problem without impacting people who are just passing through, are good behavior, are that like to do tricks on their jet skis, because it's not every jet ski that exceeds this noise threshold. So I want more time to get some more data before we actually frame up what the new permanent rule should look like.
Okay, so I think that we have Josh Mulholland that would like to make some comments. Welcome, Josh.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, early members of the board. For the record, my name is Josh Mulholland, Environmental Policy Program Manager for your Oregon State Marine Board. And first of all, I want to apologize that I was, what was that?
She's got to turn the volume up.
So I'm actually too quiet for once.
Talk now, Josh.
Okay.
Can everyone hear me now? Colleen can hear me.
We're working on it.
Okay.
Is it on this one? Here.
What is
I apologize for the short delay here. We're trying to increase some volume.
Talk a little for us, Josh.
Okay, go ahead.
How about now?
Much better.
Much better? I will start over then. So thank you, Chair, early members of the board.
Hold on a sec, Josh. So it's showing. I know it's showing that one by coming out of there.
know why.
I can turn my volume on also.
It'll get us.
It'll echo though, won't it?
Yeah,
Probably.
Mhm.
I can move this closer to them.
Okay. You got her?
Right. Say something, Josh, please. Check.
Hello? How am I now?
I'll go right here. Just watch the ups.
Okay, Josh.
Okay, board members, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Thumbs
Yes.
up. Okay, perfect. So I'll start over. Thank you, Chair Early, members of the board. For the record, my name is Josh Mulholland, Environment and Policy Program Manager for the Oregon State Marine Board. First off, I want to apologize for not being there in person. I intended to be, but I have some personal matters at home that required my attention. So I'm joining you virtually, and sorry I'm causing you some problems. Anyway, I was sitting here listening to the conversation, and I want to kind of propose a hybrid framework to what I think that captures the conversation that you all had. The first one being that look, we absolutely did recognize this as an issue. I support the idea of going forward with a temporary rule, which we can do immediately to provide some initial immediate relief, because I think that was the board's intent in January. And as Chair Early mentioned, going through other non-regulatory channels and working with municipalities ultimately was not able to get us to that solution. I'm also hearing this desire for some more input before we do any kind of permanent rules. Like Director Warren said, we often are able to get the most comprehensive public input when we do have a rulemaking process open, when we do have something proposed. So then we can go out and get that public information on it and potentially adjust what the rules might be, or ultimately just not go through with the rulemaking. We'll actually talk about a similar process that we took for the mini jetters a little bit later in this meeting. So another option would be to okay the temporary rule now, open up that rulemaking process with a framework similar to the one that Member Withy described, or maybe somewhat different. Have that, let me go out with that to the public, to some of these stakeholders, and then you can get some more robust input on those, and then we can come back in July, and at that point you'll have the flexibility to then continue with that rules, essentially adopting those into permanent rules. Or if you'd like to then see something a little bit different, we then have the time to consider it more before we get to October. I'm a little bit hesitant to encourage waiting for the official opening of the rulemaking in July, because I'd rather there not be a hiatus between a temporary rule and then a permanent rule that we're putting in place that would ultimately get to a solution. So that would just be another option for the board to consider.
Thank you, Josh, very much. Comments?
So, Josh, if I understood you correctly, you were supporting my motion.
Remember, with the I'm not going to say support. It's up to the board to make those decisions. I will say that I think it would align with, not that I don't support it, that sounded wrong, but I think that would align with kind of the direction that you're ultimately all going, to be able to facilitate that information gathering. Because without that, I don't, the next 3 months, without an official comment period open, we fail to typically hear from the entire public at large. If we have something to go out with, I think we'll have the most information to bring back to you. So yes, a temporary rule with an opening of permanent rulemaking. I will need some initial guidelines on what those rules would be. If it's what Member Withy proposed, that'd be fine. If the board wants to go somewhat of a slightly different direction, I'm hearing some questions about the part C of that regarding the tricks and the aerials. But I think that would be a prudent path forward on this.
Well, as of right now, we have a motion on the floor, but we do not have a second. So that being the case, I'd like to see a motion for the temporary rule at this point to be able to put that in place as soon as possible.
Good.
After hearing Josh say what he said, I'll support as a second Craig's motion.
Okay. Okay, so we would need to have some discussion on that, and then we're kind of doing the horse before the cart right now, or the cart before the horse,
All right,
because
so make a motion that we do the temporary rulemaking as described by Director Warren.
and I would second that.
Okay, can I raise another point?
On the temporary rule?
Yes.
Okay,
So one of the concerns that law enforcement has brought forward is enforcing a sound decibel rule requires training, requires equipment. The community found that that is challenging to do. That's why they've asked for additional rules or conditions where you add these two other factors, the narrative standard and the requirement that PWCs don't go out and do flips and stuff. So I'm wondering if we can't add those additional conditions to the temporary rule.
Director Warren?
So, Member Withy, I would offer that part of this is specifically from feedback from Clackamas County's legal counsel on what they could use to enforce. And we've had subsequent conversations with Clackamas County Sheriff on that. And again, I would go back to temporary rules are a tool agencies have that, again, because there's been no public process that we're describing as going through the permanent rule. You want to usually stay fairly narrow and concrete because as we've heard today, there could be other things at play. And so it's just my advice is always to keep temporary rules very narrow.
Yeah.
It's not a tool we use very often outside of fires for the Marine Board. This would be actually probably.
And I appreciate that,
Yeah.
Director Warren. And I don't disagree with you, but Clackamas County, as I researched it, recently approved these conditions with their attorney's endorsement. So that's something to consider for the future.
Sure, absolutely. I think that'd be a good consideration for a permanent rule.
Okay, so Colleen, did you have any comments?
No.
Okay. So right now we have the temporary rule motion and a second on that. And are there additional comments? Okay, so we'll take a vote on the temporary rule to give the director the authority to enact that with the narrow scope for a temporary rule. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so then now we're gonna go back and we're going to look at the motion by Member Withy and the second by Member Jackson for opening rulemaking. And so is there some discussion on that?
So again, I'm going to go back to the issue of PWCs versus all boats. Some of us who've been on the board for a while have felt pretty beat up about what's been going on the lower Willamette with regard to motorboats. And there is a huge sentiment out there amongst the motorized boating community that we are anti-motorcraft. And I really feel that we need to keep this thing limited to the PWC because that's the issue that was brought up. And again, the folks who are using other motorized craft, it's pass-through noise. It's generally not been perceived or complained about as an issue. So that's just one of my big issues or concerns about this whole thing, that we're not putting yet another burden on the motorized boating community in the lower Willamette.
Well, the motion itself was general for opening the rulemaking for the 75
in terms of giving
dB.
Like Josh some
sideboards. Okay. So is Josh still there?
I am indeed. Thank you.
Okay. So if we open the rulemaking with the motion that Member Withy made and then give you these sideboards, is that going to be adequate for being able to solicit public comment?
Yes, I think so. Chair Early, I would also say another option here would be to just, provide some of those sideboards, whether you officially open the rulemaking or not. If we have a framework, I can go out to the public, some of the interested parties, get some feedback on that, especially from some of our law enforcement on some of the enforceability, bring back kind of a suite of options in July. And at that point, the board could have a more robust discussion on selecting one of those or from that suite of proposals and to bring that to then solicit formal public comment and still have enough time to be able to put that in place prior to a temporary rule ending. So that would be, I guess, third option.
Okay, so additional discussion on the motion, which would open rulemaking at this point. Director Warren?
Surely, I would just say, again, it's a tough one, cart before the horse before the cart, however you want to get there, right? Is just, I think Josh makes a good point, is that when I spoke earlier, we can do that work with the rulemaking open or closed, but I think with the rulemaking, Josh is telling us that lets him do a little more of the public process. So certainly want to support Josh. I think it is helpful to at least have him hear things like, Member Jackson shared, Member Withy shared, things that are important for the board as he goes forward with that. Because again, I think the worst case would be we come back in July with a framework or options that are just totally misaligned with what the board might support. And I know it's early right now to know what you would support. And so those, I think, can be a little broader framework than we normally would want it. If we were in July, we'd want some really narrow ones here. I think some of these broad statements are helpful. So I guess it would just be helpful to hear what the board thinks are some options or ideas that would be important for us to explore. So that's helpful conversation for us.
Well, I would agree with Member Jackson that it's very important to not affect more boaters than we intend, and to make sure that the scope is narrow enough that it addresses the issue that we are concerned and sympathetic about, and just keep that focus in there. And also to focus on what we can control as far as rules that are enforceable, because that's my other concern, is that, what are our law enforcement partners going to be able to actually enforce? And we don't want to make their job any more difficult than it already is. Any other comments? Okay. Well, seeing as there are none, we do have a motion on the table to open rulemaking with the 75 dB sound and narrative. So I can't repeat the entire motion. So, but it's on the record. That's all right. It's on the record. And so all those in favor, please say aye.
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 And all those opposed?
Sorry, I was slow to unmute. Aye.
Okay.
What's good dramatic effect, Member Moran?
I didn't.
I didn't either. Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay. So we will open rulemaking, and Josh, do you need a few more sideboards, or will that give you a framework to be able to solicit some public comment?
Chair Early, thank you. I think this gives me the framework. I think, because the rulemaking is open, I can have some bigger conversations with folks, and then in July I can bring you quite a bit of information that at that point I think I would expect the board to either at that point close the rulemaking or decide on a framework, which would then we would carry forward. So if that's the same expectation of the board, then I think that we're good.
Thank you. So, did you have another comment?
Oh, no, Chair, I was going to ask whenever you're ready. We'd like to try a different speaker arrangement with Josh. It'll help us. We apologize with the remote nature. We're still getting our technology down. Jennifer had another solution she wanted to try just so we continue to get better at this. And so, Jennifer, you want to run that test now? So Josh, we're gonna probably just want you to talk. Sorry.
Is that also gonna help with the folks that are maybe talking for the grant?
You want me to talk?
Yes, please.
Can you
Okay.
just speak?
What would you like me to talk about?
Maybe you can describe your office.
Describe my office. It's probably over decorated. In the, right now, there's a lot of feet here, right? Okay, well, I'm glad I get to be the guinea pig here and we don't make some of our facility partners do it. So this does work out well.
Talk to us, Josh.
How was your tour? This is awkward. How was your tour yesterday in Bend?
Much better.
Okay.
And it was wonderful. Except for the echo that we get from us now.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of echo from.
Okay, we'll just press on.
Okay.
Would it
We'll
be?
do
I
some
mean, I can try to
testing.
talk louder if that would help.
We are going to take a break before we do all of our grants, so we will have a chance to work on some issues with the sound. So in the meantime, we will get back to the director's report because we'll see if anybody has any additional questions or comments on the director's report.
Well, were you done?
I have one more.
Okay.
Josh let me know that he needed a more affirmative action from the board on the rulemaking for the Newburgh pool. I don't believe he'd be voting on the rules. So Josh, go ahead and.
Just a clarification. Thank you, Director Warren. So
right there.
when we have rules that are basically mandated by the legislature, it kind of changes some things from our timeline perspective. And since that legislation passed between board meetings and we have to have those rules in place more or less immediately, that's not something that we can wait until July for. Just kind of the spacing of our board meetings does not line up with the legislative calendar, at least on this one. So the rules that we proposed that I know that you received, and it's a pretty big document. It's 99% reorganization of some rules to clarify things on the Willamette River, move all those rules in one place, and then to implement that legislation. It is a non-substantive rulemaking, but it is one that soon after the 30-day public comment period, which we are currently in, we do need to adopt. Or at least have a path forward where we can adopt something soon after that. So I would ask that the board now just, if they have any comments regarding those rules as proposed, to let us know now. We can make some changes between now and when we ultimately file. But those rules can't wait until July because the legislation goes into effect, I believe, today. So our rules can't, I would prefer our rules not be misaligned with statute for almost 4 months.
Okay, so I'm a little unclear about what it is that you need us to do right now. You just need some sideboards, or you just want to know if we approve of the rulemaking you submitted? You don't need official rulemaking opened?
The legislation, Chair, the legislation opened up the rulemaking. So
Right.
I mean, that's why it was not brought to the board. So at this point, it would just be an okay from the board. Whether it's a motion or not, I don't know if that necessarily matters. But for us to implement those rules after the public comment period, again, we don't have a choice in the matter. There's very little subjectivity there. But I don't want to go through a whole rulemaking process without the board's involvement. And since this is the only meeting in that time frame, I just want to make sure that the opportunity is provided to the board to provide any input on those rules in the parts that we can change.
Thank you. Well, the legislature was very, very direct in what they expected from us. And so I would expect you to implement and become aligned with what their intent was as soon as possible.
Well, when Jennifer sent out the notice, 2 weeks ago, I guess it was, I saw it and kind of didn't really think anything about it, but several folks who I speak with frequently, because it did roll Newber pool rules and lower Willamette rules kind of into one discussion. They were kind of like, whoa, this isn't what we expected it to be. And so I did sit down and go through it, and it seems to articulate what the legislature wanted, and, you know, what we were looking at for the lower Willamette just puts it all in a really nice, concise box. So, yeah, thumbs up from me.
Good job.
Thank you. So we have that public comment period open through the end of April. Maybe if as you get a chance to look at that document, and again, it's just a simplification, a reorganization in most ways. And now that most of the Willamette is under the same regulatory framework, putting it in one rule seemed to make more sense. We had it in 5 or 6 different rules for different counties, and it was becoming kind of unwieldy. And we heard some from our law enforcement partners about that. So anyway, if there is input on that, feel free to get a hold of me on that. And like I said, we can make some relatively small changes to that before we file, but those need to be filed well before Memorial Day, or else there's going to be some misalignment of laws that will be problematic.
Okay, anybody else? All right, thank you, Josh. Director Warren.
Mr. Chair Early, that's all the updates I have. I'd love to take questions.
Okay. Okay.
You know, I want to extend my appreciation to Janine for the before and after pictures on the projects. It really is helpful to me and gives me an understanding of what we've accomplished when we approve the funds for these projects. So thank you, Janine. It's a great job. That's all I have.
I'd like to thank Member Jackson for attending the Westport boating access dedication. She had some really great insight, and it was nice to see one of the first projects from the waterway access bill come to fruition. Just curious about the meeting at the Josephine County Parks. This is probably for Janine Bolduck, but if there was good attendance on that, and if we have any update on it.
Chair Early, I'll ask Janine Bolduck to join us at the table, and I'm sure she can answer that question.
Good morning, Chair Early, members of the board. For the record, my name is Janine Bolduck, and I'm our Boating Facilities Program Manager. It was well attended. The counties also received a tremendous response on their surveys. They're busy tabulating it all, and I anticipate we'll have a report from them within this month, and I'll share that information with the board. It was well attended by anglers, guides, as well as local neighbors.
Well, thank you. It was very well advertised. So that's why I was curious about that particular one. It hit a lot of them. So then the only other thing I was going to address was congratulations to the Marine Board for the DAS Comprehensive Gold Star Award. Congratulations to the agency.
Great.
Any other questions or comments on the board book? Okay. Well, we will go ahead and move on then to our next item of business, which is going to be the mini jet update. So we are going to be hearing from Josh Mulholland again.
Thank you, Chair Early. Hopefully this one will be a brief one. So as you recall, we've been talking about mini jet boats for the last couple meetings. At our last meeting, we decided to pause the rulemaking process that was initially proposed and look at some other possibly non-regulatory solutions.
Oh, okay, go ahead, keep talking.
Am I getting time out or no? Okay. The board correctly pointed out that the proposed solution did not seem to fit the problem that we were attempting to address. And I'm going to pause here and see if we have some sound issues.
All good.
Okay. So since that time, since the last board meeting, staff has been looking into this further, and we've spoke to several stakeholders from some of the different perspectives. We found out a few things. One is that the mini jet community is now very aware of the potential problems with the operation of those watercraft in certain areas. And that community has already embarked on its own outreach and education kind of campaigns. You know, I think whether we went the correct route initially with the proposed rulemaking or not, what it did do is kind of make some people aware that there were potential issues, and many in that community even saw some of those issues and have taken it upon themselves to try to address it, regardless of what the Marine Board was doing from a regulatory perspective. We've also been increasingly in conversations with natural resource agencies that have shown interest, the ones with jurisdiction over fish, wildlife, habitat, and made it clear to them that there is an open line of communication between our agency and theirs. I've articulated that process from which they can recommend boating regulations in areas of concerns, including but not necessarily even limited to the operation of mini jets or jet boats, and that the board at the last meeting made it very clear that you know they are responsive to the needs of those natural resource agencies when it comes to local rulemaking to protect those topics of concern. So at this point, we did not close the rulemaking process when we left in January. My recommendation to the board right now, I think that we can be successful in partnering with some of those groups doing outreach, some of the manufacturers. In some ways, it's good that this is such a small community because they're easily to more comprehensively reach than it's, you know, it's not thousands and thousands of boaters at this point. It is just maybe a couple hundred that are more tight knit than most of our boating communities, or at least there's an opportunity to reach many of them. To let us continue to see where we can get with some education and some outreach, some engagement, some partnering with the education efforts that they're already doing. They have crafted some great messaging, and I think we're just going to look to try to amplify and magnify that. And then at this point, officially close that rulemaking, just so that the specter of rulemaking does not hang over these really positive engagement efforts. And then see what we can get for this year, this boating season, and understand that we could always bring this back. We will always be receptive to natural resource agencies with some specific concerns, but close this statewide rulemaking process, at least for this point. And that's all, or at least at this point. And that's all I have.
Okay, comments?
I'd like to concur with staff's recommendation, and so I make a motion that we close the rulemaking on the mini jet boat subject.
Second.
And so with that motion on the table, then Josh, so do you need direction then to also talk with all of the stakeholder agencies that you mentioned in your report? Do you need that officially in there?
Sure, thank you. I do not. That's part of our day-to-day work activities anyway. I mean, we do those things all the time. So no, we will continue to do that unless the board specifically tells me not to, I guess.
Would like to maybe have an update when it comes to October to see how how the community is dealing with this issue. Just some feedback at that point. I think that would be prudent for the board to hear.
Sure, that sounds good. Sorry.
I agree with you early, and also just want to say thank you, Josh, for coordinating with the agencies, coordinating with the stakeholder groups and all that, and bringing this back around.
I really like it when a boating community can help themselves, and so I like that a lot better than rules. Any other comments or questions? Okay, we have a motion to officially close this rulemaking. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay, and so now we have item number C here, which is going to be our 2023 budget kickoff. And it's going to take us just a couple minutes to kind of switch things around here, but I would like to officially welcome Christine Cornish. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Actually, it's slideshow and then
Slideshow.
on the top
Go,
row.
go
where it
do on
says
the top row,
slideshow.
it says slideshow.
Good morning, Chair Early, members of the board. For the record, my name is Krista Price. I am the Business Service Manager at the Oregon State Marine Board. And what I'm here today for is to provide just an overview of how we arrive at our budgets. And so if you've heard this before, I apologize, but if not, hopefully it's a little bit of information for you guys. So, and dive right in. If you have any questions, just so what happens is basically you start off with a basic budget that you have for your 1921 or 21-23, whatever it is. So our basic budget right now is the 21 and 22 budget. And what they do is initially we do a kickoff in March, and that already happened, and that's with the directors, fiscal staff, have a big meeting, a big kickoff. You have economists in there, they provide some revenue projections, explain some budget instructions, and provide all that information. And we had that kickoff, like I said, back in March 16th. And then what you do is you start off with your basic current service level budget. And that was your 21-23 budget that we had. And then anything was in addition. So if we had to go to the e-board and ask for any kind of limitations or anything else, then that would be included in that current service level. And then based on the budget book, then we add inflation and they provide that to us. So for the 23-25 budget, you're going to have an inflation factor of 4.2% and then 8.8% for non-state employee and personnel costs. So you add it in. So I kind of consider it as almost like an ice cream sundae. You start off with that base budget and then you just kind of keep adding stuff onto it to come up with your next budget. And so you add in that inflation factor, you add in any what's called policy option packages. And so if you hear what POPs is what they call them, you add that in there as well. And that's basically what we're forecasting out that we need to either clean something up, housekeeping, what I call for budget, or add something if you're looking to add any kind of new programs or anything. So that would be included in that. And then that's basically what we call our agency requested budget. We have to submit that by July 31st to the governor's office. And then the governor goes in and they review it, make changes, recommendations, and then they send it back to us in December. And we take a look at it, we form our own presentation, and then you're going to go back into the legislature and then you present that budget that's given to us by the governor. And then once we present that, then the legislature takes a look at it, they revise it, they make changes, they do what they want, and then they send it back to the governor for signature. And then that becomes basically our legislatively approved budget. So it's really, it's a longer process, but it takes time to build each of those pieces. And so we'll be working on that over the next year, basically. And so some of the things I wanted to remind folks is we're going to have a governor change in November. And so that'll factor in. That new governor is the one that's going to be the one looking at our budget and making those recommendations. And typically they work off of their priorities and the policies that they want to set for the state. So obviously our lens is Oregon State Marine Board, but their lens is the full state. And so they have a more comprehensive outlook, and they'll take and make those recommendations in their budget that they give to us in December. And then the legislative adopted budget, that goes to Joint Ways and Means or subcommittees. We make presentations, and then obviously they make their recommendations and then send it on to the governor for approval. And then once the governor approves it, like I said, then that's our 23-25 budget. So some of the things that I wanted to bring forward is our policy option packages. And I consider quite a few of these more of housekeeping. So I'm going to start at the bottom is more of a housekeeping. Our accounting tech series, DAS HR went through and determined that we really don't need that many accounting tech positions. They had 1 through 3. They said, let's collapse that. And so we have an accounting tech 3 and an accounting tech 2. And so we're going to need additional funding for the accounting tech 2 position because it basically adds a couple steps to it. So basically that's just a little bit more money that we need to go in and ask for approval. Also, we have the managerial classification alignment. And what that is there was 2 positions, that's Josh's and Janessa's, that were operation and policy analyst 3s. And those were determined to actually be what they call now is the principal executive management D. But they have since revised that. Now they call it business operation manager. And so we're going to ask for more funding for that to cover those positions. And then also we have the 0.5 FTE position. That was
the role we got for the Toad Water Sports in 2019, and we'd used Jessica to start the program, Jessica Watson, and then last summer Ethan.
Right.
And that, so it's that position.
Yeah, and so we're going to be asking to turn that into a full-time position. And then the other one, the very last one, is funding for 2 boating safety advocates for the underserved communities. And that'll come under, back in the 21 session, they had House Bill 2167 that basically codified the Racial Justice Council. And so that included statutes that provided that we engage specifically Black, Indigenous, Latino, Asian, Pacific Islander, and tribal communities as part of our budget and policy creation. And so that would be more directed towards the boating safety side of it, things. And so we're going to need to include that into the budget side. And so we were basically asking for funding for 2 of the boating safety advocates.
Member with you has a question.
Where would they be located? Would they be in Portland or some other location in the state?
Chair Early, member with you, I think that still has yet to be undetermined. I think we're going to kind of do community outreach and kind of allow them to help us guide this process.
Are they full-time or part-time or seasonal?
Chair Early, member Jackson, I believe those are going to be seasonal to my knowledge.
So member Jackson, you may recall Randy at the January meeting presented on the boating safety advocates, and they were a contracted resource, and will contract in the timeframes where it makes sense, which will likely be summer for the areas.
So one of the things that, just to clarify, one of the things when I first came on the board was these, I kept seeing these policy option packages, policy. What in the heck is that? It's basically spending money.
It is.
Yeah. So, really is. I mean, if you know,
Sure, don't be so forthright.
We're asking to spend money. So, I mean, I'm just saying that for the benefit of other members on the board, because it, you know, they have all these confusing names for a lot of things.
Yes.
And then the other thing is a lot of these alignments that we're doing are because the state has actually changed classifications. So we need to become aligned with what they have. Yes. So it's not like we're trying to spend more money. It's that we need to become aligned with what the state has.
Early, you're correct. And then, like I said, it's a housekeeping thing. We're just trying to make sure that because any dollar that you spend, you have to get approval. And so since we're going to be utilizing more funds for these housekeeping things, then we need to make sure that we get approval.
I thought that might be helpful.
Yes, it is. Okay. So this is just kind of high level. I wanted to provide just a couple different slides in regards to our revenue forecast narrative. We have in here, it'll show revenue by fund. So we have in our 21-23 budget, 30.2 million in other funds, which includes, and you can see on the graph on the right, boat registration, titling, AIS, guides and outfitters, towed water sports, and floating homes and houseboats. And then we receive 6.5 in federal funds, and that includes the Coast Guard, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and just a sliver from the U.S. Department of Interior. So I wanted to make sure that you kind of see the graph of where our funds are coming from. And part of our budget narrative is the allocations. Where do our funds go? And a majority of it goes to law enforcement, as you can see, 43%, boating facilities, And Janine's group that does a great job, 30%, admin and education, 22%, and then AIS is 5%. And hopefully I'm not going too fast. And then as a budget comparison again, this just shows agency allocation. And then you see in the gray bar is the 1921, and then the blue one is 21-23. So it kind of shows you just slight increases for each of these programs. And if you have any questions in regards to revenue outlook, we had to send in our revenue projections, and these are preliminary, obviously. We had to send those in at the end of March. And what that is it's taking and looking at the whole picture of what we're going to get for the 23-25. So obviously, you know how hard that is because we're still waiting for our fuel tax survey reports to be sent back. I think we received those in May. So we'll be able to get a little clearer picture, but we really we're looking at the crystal ball and trying to estimate what we're going to be receiving and then creating that budget on that. And so you can tell it's difficult. Obviously, how many times have we received a kicker? That tells you state economists even struggle at times. You just don't know. You can have a pandemic that throws everything out of whack. So it really is, you try to do the best that you can based on the numbers that you have. And so that's what we've tried to do.
Question.
Can we go back one
Yeah.
slide, please? Actually, one more where we have the breakdown.
Uh-huh.
So is there any, I mean, I see 73%. Is there, and that's the largest percentage that goes to that department, but do we have information as to, it'd be interesting to see, if there's a rest or like just the demographics of what is actually happening, because I see that there's very little in admin and education. I think we could probably solve some of that by putting maybe a little more into that education part to prevent or more arrest or more accidents on the water. So I don't know if there's any data.
So, Member Guzman, you're music to my ears there. One of the things that I've asked Brian Paulson to do as he comes on with the voting safety manager is to think about how he could report some of that information to the board. It's not information that we've brought, at least since the time I've been here. I think it would help the board understand what those dollars are going towards, what we get. And so if you would allow, we will make that a future action item and bring a report to the July board meeting, which will be excellent time because we'll be down with the law enforcement training as well.
Okay, please, thank you. And if we could also get a breakdown as to, the type of incidents and maybe arrests, and see the breakdown. That would be excellent.
So in conclusion, the governor signs a legislatively adopted bill and it becomes our actual bill for 23-25. One thing I want to throw in there is the board is the one that determines the budget. This is something that if you guys determine that there's other areas that you want to focus on more, that's obviously within your right. And so obviously it comes with decisions. If you pull money, because we only have one pot of money, and if you pull money from one area, obviously another area is going to have to take cuts. So that's something that always I like to explain to people that you only got one pot, and so you want to make sure that you utilize it the way it's best served for the agency.
That's always the difficulty is when you're looking at that budget is to be able to try to balance it all, because you don't want to take away from something that you're being requested for, and yet you give it to another that you're being requested for. Something has to give. And sometimes it's across the board and sometimes it's not. Member Withy?
Sometimes we do have money that's spent, comes back into the pot. I guess that's just reallocated based on the formula you're putting forward here. Like some of the law enforcement didn't spend all the money necessarily. It's just rolled back into the picture and we continue to spend it based on that.
Sure, really, Member Withy, yes, you're correct.
So any other questions for Christy?
I have one comment, Chair Early. I know the process is new for a lot of folks, so I just want to point out that we're lucky to have one of our key stakeholders in this is the Legislative Fiscal Office. So we work with the executive branch, work a lot with DAS and that side. But the legislative side obviously becomes very important in this process as well. And we're lucky to have a very engaged Legislative Fiscal Officer. And that was Tim Walker for those that met him yesterday. And so just to help you connect, since we're talking budget, I thought it'd be a great time to say, why was he wandering around? He's a great partner in that and instrumental when we get over to the legislative side and how our budget moves through that.
We always like it to move seamlessly.
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank
That was
you.
a wonderful presentation. Good overview of what the budget is and what we are going to be looking at in the future. Okay. So we had planned to take a little bit of a break before the facilities grant. It's a little bit earlier. How does the board feel? Would you like a break right now, or should we start our grants and?
Stretch break.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and take about a 15-minute break. At this time, if you need to still check out of your motel room, then you can. And then we will resume. Appreciate all of the grant participants being patient with us for a few minutes. Thank you. Okay, this is the Oregon State Marine Board, and it is our regular quarterly meeting on April 7th, and we are resuming after a short recess. And we are moving on to item D. Would like to say one more thank you for that 2020 or the 2023 budget kickoff from Christy Cornish. Thank you again for that informational item on number C. So facilities grants, Janine Bullock.
Thank you, Chair Early, members of the board. For the record, my name is Janine Bullock and I'm our boarding facilities program manager. So many of the items in this front part we discussed yesterday during the work session, so I'll give an abbreviated update. I do want to point out that we are consistently seeing more public comments. I think that adds to the value of this process when we evaluate grants. And I anticipate that we're going to continue to see increases in the public participation of our grant applications. The ranking is there. The underneath bullet 4 shows you how much money was identified in our budget for special payments, which are our grant programs. And essentially, we've got a little over $2 million of our building facility grant, the motorized money, 280,000 of the waterway access grant funds for the non-motorized boating, about 732,000 of federal funds, which is a combination of boating infrastructure grants and clean vessel act grants available for cycle 2. If the board approves staff's recommendations, we will have no additional waterway access grant funds available unless we have our emergency board approval, and then we'll have around $60,000 for the biennium, plus any cost savings that are realized from projects. We will have some motorized money, yes, Craig?
Do we have an opportunity to reallocate funds if we so choose to increase the waterway access budget?
Within this current biennium, the only way we can increase those funds is to ask for an emergency board, and we are going to ask for some.
Oh, did you mean the cost savings? Were you talking about cost savings?
Well, it says we're down to $60,000.
We would be.
My question is, do we have an opportunity to change that by reallocating the funds we have in the budget?
So, member with the, take a shot at this, which I think I've got the question you're asking. So you're asking, could we take from other areas that are underspending to use here? And the way I often describe budget, when we think about that, is we go to the legislator and we paint a picture how we're going to spend our money, and they expect that there's going to be some adjustments in the way, small ones, but you generally need to bring back the picture that you painted for them. And so, because waterway access was established under such a specific set of statutes, and it's got its own little curtain around it in terms of how the money can be used, I'd be hesitant to take money from either unspent law enforcement or other branch programs.
So I'm going back to this presentation. You said it's up to the board to decide how to spend the money. That is restricted by legislative rules, I guess, or constraint.
So remember with so when the budget actually becomes a bill and gets passed into law, and there's some level of specificity in that bill. Some agencies have very, very tight control. Some have a little higher, which ours tends to be higher. But again, I always think about that underlying picture. But one of the things that Janine Black's kind of commenting is that the waterway access program has done better on revenue than we projected. And so we're sort of living with those projections, other than we will go to the E-board to try to get a little increase to access some of those funds in this biennium. But in July, when we bring back the agency's budget for approval to take for the 23, I would expect that we'll be asking to up our waterway access limitation a little bit to account for that increased revenue that we want.
Just a general comment of support. I am very pleased with the reach out programs we are supporting with the waterway access. I think it's doing a wondrous job of bringing more disabled or disadvantaged or just youth into the boating community. So I fully support what we're doing, and we'll be looking at 3 projects here that are in those lines. So I also like the project funds too, so it's kind of a hard choice. But if that's what it comes down to, but I want to really say that I support what we're doing in the waterway access fund. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
And member with you, I would just add one more comment before Jeannie gets going on that. I think one of the good things that's come out, a lot of good things come out of the waterway access, but one of them is we're actually starting to understand how big of a need there is actually out there. We always guessed, but as we see this grant program oversubscribed, it helps us talk community to the legislator to the board about the need that we see out there. I think everyone knew there was an unmet need, but seeing it in an oversubscribed grant program.
All right, so to continue on, I am also identifying I'd like to increase our small grants. Now, the rules were finalized, I believe, on March 9th. They became effective to increase that threshold project total from 20,000 to 50,000, with our maximum grant going from 10,000 to 30,000. And so I'm looking at increasing it from the 100,000 that we started at providing to 350,000. I do anticipate that we will receive requests through that program and the new rules that will spend that waterway access money, as well as numerous facility folks have talked to me about multilingual signage, kiosks, waypoint signing, doing some parking repairs. So I anticipate that money will be spent very easily, but it still leaves us some facility grant funds that will most likely be spent for material purchases in anticipation for next biennium for some large projects that will be coming forward. And that allows us to save time and resources with the shipping supply delays and have everything set up so we can have people successfully complete things within the water work windows. So historically, the board has considered grants in different blocks. This cycle didn't really make sense to have a bunch of individual blocks with only one grant underneath. So I went ahead and made the decision. We're just going to consider these all individually. And so is there any questions up to this point? If not, right. So D1, we did have 3 applicants withdraw for various reasons, and that information was shared with the board. All 3 do anticipate coming back during cycle 1 of the 23-25 biennium. And so those will be ones the board will see again. So moving into D2 is the individual consideration, and we will take those in grant order. So the first grant would be 1697 Jackson County with Howard Ferry Resort, and I believe Steve Lambert's on the line. Steve, if you could unmute.
Hear me?
Yes, thank you. So this is a project
I was gonna say I'm unmuted, Jenny.
Okay, perfect. So this is a project the board had previously considered and approved, and then COVID hit. And it impacted the county's budget significantly with staffing, financially, and it just couldn't happen. So now is another opportunity. The county has significantly increased their matching funds on this, as well as ODFW has kicked in some additional funds. Steve, do you want to add anything else about your project?
I would just add that we appreciated the board's allocation this last round a couple years ago. As Janine mentioned, when this project, unfortunately, the timing of it fell right when we were having to close parks with the uncertainty of what we were looking at from reopening parks on a statewide basis with COVID, and just really got to become a victim of the statewide kind of pandemic impacts. We have circled back. Our match is 100% firm. Our Board of Commissioners has allocated $3 million of our general fund to go towards this project. As Janine mentioned, ODF&W has upped their match, and the $1.8 million from the Bureau of Reclamation is still secure, and that grant has been extended for another year to 2023. So all of the match that you see in the application is firm. We did receive last fall final permits from Corps of Engineers and DSL and DEQ as well. And we actually had spent about $900,000 on the project last fall, and we put out an invitation to bid for the 45 pilings and the grading on the lake bed to be completed. So currently, as the facility stands, all piling are installed. The lake bed is graded, and we are just waiting for docks and gangways to be installed at this point.
So staff is recommending approval of this grant in the amount of $562,897 of state voter funds to match $5,368,207.39 of applicant match. Does the board have any questions of Steve or myself?
No, I know that I know a lot of people down in that area will be very anxious to see this completed, especially since this is probably going to be an extremely low water year. I would make a motion to align with the staff recommendation to authorize facility grant 1697 in the amount of $562,897 state voter funds to match $5,368,000 applicant match as identified in the modified budget. It's a huge project.
I second that.
Any questions, any comments? It's really exciting to see this, Steve. Thank you very much. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, and Chair Early and members of the board, we appreciate your support on all the projects down here in Southern Oregon, especially this project, to see it through to completion. So have a good rest of your meeting.
Thank you. Thanks.
All right, the next grant is 1699, and it's on page 11, item D in your board book. And Donnie Berland, are you on the line? Donnie, are you there?
Yeah, I heard.
I am. Good morning.
Good morning, Donnie. Thank you. I know you were busy trying to get your parks reopened, so thank you for calling in.
Oh, no worries at all.
So Baker County has applied for a vault toilet to be placed closer to the low water boat ramp. As the water fluctuations have gone down, their existing flush restroom is a long way away. This will definitely help out with meeting sanitation needs, as well as it takes into consideration the environmental impacts by not having to have water. So staff is recommending this grant for $47,000. Donnie, do you want to add anything?
I sure appreciate the consideration of this. This is really the first step in making our park way more ADA accessible. The vault toilet will be put at the head of the ramp here at Hewitt Park. People of all abilities will be able to have access to it year round. Currently, we pull in a little porta potty for 6 months out of the year, and as any of you know, they're kind of tight and are not ADA conducive. So I really, really appreciate the consideration today.
So does the board have any questions of Donnie or myself? Yes, Craig.
A couple meetings back, we considered a project where they were requesting security cameras in the restrooms. Is this the same location?
No. This is a different location.
And then my other question is, I'm all for providing additional ADA access, but this is also shared drivable. So the question is this mostly Oregon voters, or is this more Idaho voters.
So I did look at the triennial survey, and voters are coming from all over to access the Brownlee Pool, from Washington, California, Nevada. This is a popular location. It's a big economic driver for this area.
So we're charging non-resident fees for this.
No, we are
That's just a-
increasing the tourism.
Yeah, this is actually a really nice facility, but I'm glad to see that they're going to be doing something there to address the low water, because it is a long ways.
So I'd like to make a motion that we approve the staff's recommendation, facility grant 1699, amount of $47,000. Facility grant funds. Match $13,000 of application match. That's to identify the modified budget. Total project cost is $60,000.
I would second. Any questions or comments? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Thank you, Donnie, for being here.
Thank you so much for approving that. Have a great meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, the next application is with the city of Deep Lake, 1701, and it's on page 16 of the board book. Barbara, are you on, or Roy? Roy or Barbara, City of Depot Bay? They had planned to be here. I did forward to the board early this morning a letter and an email from the mayor indicating that the city did approve unanimously the cost increase to maintain the match on the boarding docks.
So you do have the City of Depot Bay on the phone. My name is Carla During. I'm the Executive Administrative Assistant here at the city, and Roy Hildebrand, the Harbor Master, if there are any questions.
Thank you. Thank you. This is replacing boarding docks. It is one of the simplest projects we can bring to the board, where we're not replacing piling or abutments. It's a fairly simple project where the old docks are floated out on top of an existing concrete ramp, and the new docks are floated in place over the existing concrete ramp. Their docks are falling apart. There's exposed vegetation that's entering the waterway. It's spongy. They're just a mess. And so staff is recommending an approval now, because it's no longer conditional. They have the city council has agreed to increase their match of $73,470. Roy, do you have any comments, or?
Just that I appreciate the board considering us. Our boat launch docks are a vital part of our community down here. We do have quite a bit of boating traffic, which starts middle of April and goes usually through November, weather permitting, of course. Our docks are in pretty bad shape. They've been there for long enough to where a lot of the material has started to rot away. Flotation is becoming an issue, and I'm getting concerned about the overall safety because of how much these things are used and how degraded they've gotten.
Member Withy.
Yeah, I want to start off by congratulating the marina on their efforts to provide accessibility. For those folks that aren't familiar with Depot Bay, this is a very challenging site to provide accessibility. The marina sits 150 feet below the road, and they've gone to the effort to put in a ramp with many switchbacks to access the marina roadway. It's quite something to see, quite something to be on as you go down that elevation. So I'm fully supportive of what they've been doing. I would ask that they consider maybe looking at their accessible parking space for both the trailer. That needs a little work. But otherwise, I'm fully supportive of the grant application. And for that reason, I will make a motion that we approve grant 1701 in the amount of $163,530. Voting facility grant funds, and that's $73,470 in applicant match. Identified, modified.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second for facility grant 1701. Are there any additional questions or discussion? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Thank you very much, and please tell your mayor thank you as well.
Thank you.
Thank
We
you.
really appreciate your support. Thank you.
The next application is 1704 with Bend Park and Rec District. And Rachel is in the audience. You want to come up in case they have questions? This is on page 21 of our board application. So this has 3 sites that will be looked at: McKay Park, Miller's Landing Park, and Columbia Park. This is doing a feasibility data collection analysis to determine what is the best course of action at these 3 locations to improve accessibility to the water. And the Park District has done a phenomenal job with their public outreach. They're going to continue to do more through this process. It's a fantastic job that they've done to try to capture all of the waterway interest feedback through this. The staff is recommending grant 1704 in the amount of $51,127 of waterway access grant funds. Rachel, do you want to add things?
Okay, well, thank you, staff, for your support and your all's consideration today. We're incredibly excited about these projects. As you all know, we've discussed, as of the end of last year, we adopted our river access and habitat restoration plan, which, as Jimmy mentioned, had extensive public outreach. And these were certainly 3 of the highest priority sites for improvements from our community, particularly since the Columbia Access Plan has been closed since July of 2020. So we're certainly excited to have kicked off our data collection process and look forward to seeing what opportunities are available at these sites to improve access for all. And then, of course, once we have some conceptual designs, we'll be going back out to the public to get feedback on those opportunities for enhancements. So appreciate your consideration and certainly hear for any questions you all have.
Question?
I'd like to really commend Bend Park and Recs for taking this as, instead of just like, we want to develop this project site, to actually take a little bit higher level view, because everything, especially on the river, is related. I also really appreciate the tour to really get a sense of how interrelated everything, and just how bad some of these sites are, and kind of seeing what some of those potentials and how they interact and how they interrelate to each other for the different user groups. And in my mind, with having had my first career as an environmental planner and having sat on the committee that did the waterway access grant kind of conceptualization of that program, I would like to make a motion that we approve grant 1704 in the amount of $51,127 of waterway access grant to match $51,127 of applicant match for a total project cost of $102,205.
Second the motion.
With 2 seconds. Okay, so we have a motion to go ahead and approve this. Is there any other additional questions or any other comments? Wanted to thank you again for the tour yesterday. It was really informative. And it's always nice to be able to it's great to see the pictures, and the timeline that you sent was really a stark reality check. But it helps to just put boots on the ground and just see it. So be able to put a picture to this application is so helpful. Do you have any idea of a ballpark for these projects, or you really need to get this done before you can even dial in what it is you think is going to be your total cost?
Total cost for all. it really depends. I think we're too early in this process. It's the feasibility analysis is critical because the river plan really, we took it at like the 50,000 level, right? And we didn't have the opportunity to dive deep for designs. And some of these were not clear, frankly, like what's going to be viable at Columbia, which is something we've talked about with staff, given the river current in that area and the date. We really need to better understand from the data analysis that Ian's team are doing right now, what is viable at each of those locations. And then I think after we get through this initial phase and have conceptual designs, then we'll be able to start doing some cost estimates to get some push in the ballpark. So I can't say this time there's some rough estimates that we included within the river plan, but that was making assumptions of what would happen. And so I don't know that those would become credible at this point, given that we haven't completed data analysis. But we're certainly happy to keep the board and staff, involved. We'd like to continue the conversation and would certainly welcome anyone from staff or the board coming out any time to further tour for updating on the projects.
Well, as Member Withy pointed out, and commended Janine on earlier, it's always nice to see the before and after pictures. And even during this process, I mean, just seeing if what you see there, forwarding it on to Janine because she always shares it with us. So appreciate that. Any other comments or questions? Okay, all those in favor of facility grant 1704, please say aye.
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 Aye. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. We're excited to kick this project forward, move this project forward.
Thank you. The next one is 1707 Willamette River Keepers. And Annette Pearson, are you on?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes. Annette is very new, I believe, into your current position with them.
That is correct. I am the River Recreation Stewardship Coordinator for Willamette Riverkeeper. I've been there for about a month.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
So this project builds on a pilot project that Travel Oregon funded. It's called the River Discovery Paddles, and they're going to be doing paddle trips from Eugene, basically all the way to Portland. So it also stretches out into different geographic areas than from other programs that were previously funded. And Annette, do you want to add anything from your 1 month of knowledge on this?
I have been volunteering with Willamette Riverkeeper for several years, and they've been doing these types of programs for a while. This one just would allow us to reach out to a typically underserved community that maybe hasn't felt the support or a safe environment in order to get out onto the river. So this grant would really help us do that. So thank you.
So staff is recommending funding of this grant in the amount of $35,000 of waterway access funds. Does the board have any questions for Annette or myself? Yes, Craig.
I really applaud you for pursuing this and supporting the community. The question is, how do you keep them involved? How do you keep a new paddler engaged and give them further opportunities to with his interest in boating?
Yeah, I think that the main thing would be to partner with groups that would just feel empowered by that engagement. So once they got out there and felt comfortable on the river and possibly had some access to equipment that we could provide, they would feel empowered to do that on their own. There are certain areas that are certainly accessible and safe, and we would recommend that based on our expertise over the years.
So do you have specific groups that you're partnering with?
Yeah, there are some groups, mostly in the Salem and Newburgh area, that we have partnered with. Wild Diversity is one that is here in Portland. We worked with a group called Straub Outdoors. I haven't, met them specifically, but I know that they did take them out to one of our properties last year. There's another organization called Get Hooked that we've worked with as well. So there's several different partnerships that have been started. It's just been a little slow going with the pandemic, but I think we can ramp it up this summer for sure. So
It'd be helpful for me, and I think the board, if we're able to see some demographics of who's participating as a product of the project.
Is that
Sure. I think that, as we have these trips, we will definitely have some of those statistics available as long as the groups are willing to provide those.
Yeah, demographic information is a very sensitive topic. Nobody wants to feel like they're being profiled or targeted. And so one of the things I'm thinking about is seeing if people could do maybe a short volunteer survey of, is this your first time paddling? Would you do this again? Would you wear a life jacket? And see if they would share more of that type of information, because we definitely don't want to make somebody feel uncomfortable doing this. We want to encourage use, and the demographic component piece can be a very sensitive.
But on the other hand, we want to make sure we're reaching the communities that we're trying to.
I remember Jackson and Member Guzman.
Along that line, I don't know if we need to have individual data, but just in a summary that said, some of these trips are advertised openly to the public, some of these trips we partnered with this organization for trip and leader, we partnered with this organization. So we just have kind of an umbrella of reaching out to the different diversity communities. I also really like the fact that the participants get to take on their life jacket at the end of the session. I also appreciate what you just mentioned about getting out of the Portland metro area, because it's kind of one of my interests. Is we've got 4 really awesome non-motorized outreach education programs requested, and they all seem to be Portland-centric organizations. But I really want to see this money hitting people statewide. So, trying to get as many trips on the Willamette outside of Montgomery County, outside of the Region 1. From ODOT, I think it would be great to be able to get people out to, down in Eugene and the Newburgh area, other places.
And I would agree as well. I think seeing more of a plan, how we're going to be reaching, underserved communities a little bit more detail will be helpful. Maybe not so much survey given that it's some of the data maybe sensitive. Just being able to understand how the actual outreach will be in a bag,
definitely more of a report at the very, after the completion it would be very helpful for us on the board. Because we are all excited about this money to be spent and reaching these communities and seeing, how it is done. And so when you interview, and perhaps Annette, when you talk to the participants afterwards and you get a participant report, do you include some of that in your final reporting?
We certainly can, yeah.
So members of the board, so for the grants we did last year with the Lower Columbia District Partnership, they provided a report, and that report was shared with the board that identified who they reached out to, how many participants, what was some of the comments that the participants made. So they gave us a detailed report with lots of photos and information to kind of give us an idea of which organizations were feeding into the program. And at the newness of this program, I'm thinking that kind of detail is probably appropriate as the program matures. Maybe we can get some additional detail, but what I'm looking for is, are you working with people of color? Are you talking to Pam? Is Pam feeding into this? Are you working with Black Men's Wellness Group? Are you working with these different organizations to pull participants in or to use them to help recruit those participants? And then to tell us how many people actually went out on the water and give us an idea of what some of the feedback was. If the board has a different direction in mind, please let me know. We can look at trying to incorporate maybe some ranking criteria into our next biennial.
Well, I do remember the report from them, and so I didn't know if that was standard in the distribution of the money, if you request that report at that time, or if they just volunteered that information. Should have asked that before, but.
We make it a condition of
Okay.
the grant that we get a report at the end of the project on what that